Hi everyone. It's good to not see you, but to be with you in a way. And I do hope you're all doing really well. Let's pray. Father, please be with us now as we look at these verses, and please help us to get to know your Son Jesus better. Amen. What do you think it takes to spend a lifetime following Jesus? What does it take to follow him as a child and then through school? To follow him as an adult, whatever that might look like for you? To follow him into old age? Why is it that some people do and some people don't? Some people follow him for years and years and years, and others fall away. Well, the book of Hebrews gives us a number of answers to that question. It's a book that really wants to encourage us to keep following him. And it does that in a few different ways. So at times there's warnings, like scary warnings, about what will happen if we turn away from Jesus and why we shouldn't. At times it's encouraging and comforting and gives us hope for the future. At times it gives us these detailed explanations of things that God has done for us and that Jesus has done for us. And of course in that it's shown us that it's only because of him that anyone actually can follow Jesus. At times it explains what it looks like practically to follow him. But before any of that, here in chapter 1, what we have is just a picture of Jesus. What we have is an explanation of who he is, so we can just look at him. Because top priority, first and foremost, for anyone who's going to follow Jesus, is to look at him, know him, get to know him better. And that's what we have in these verses, and that's what we're going to try and do this morning as we look at them. I wonder if you've ever been on a journey that was difficult at times. A few years ago, I was on a bike ride. I was with Will and another one of our friends. And at times it was easy, weather was nice, it was downhill, it was great. But other times, it was hard. And I remember thinking, oh, there's still such a long way to go. I'm not sure I'm actually going to make it to the destination. And the destination was my grandparents' house. And so one thing that helped me keep going was to think about that. You see, when it felt hard, when I felt tired, when I thought I'd rather just came and they got us, I would just picture what was going on there, because I knew that as we were on our way, my grandmother would be busy in the kitchen, preparing a feast for us for when we got there. She was probably making one of her famous stews, maybe a nice apple crumble for dessert. And of course, just thinking about that, just picturing that, helped me keep going. And the Christian life, following Jesus, is a journey. And he is our destination. And thinking about him, and in fact, knowing him now, which we can do, and getting to know him better now, is going to help us on our way. So that's what we're going to try and do this morning. And we're going to see a few different things about Jesus in these verses. Firstly, we're going to think about him as the Son. We're going to try and work out what that really means and why it's so important. Then we're going to think about Jesus as ruler. And we're going to see why he is such a suitable and perfect ruler. And then we're going to see, finally, that Jesus is worthy of being worshipped. So firstly, let's think about Jesus as the Son. I wonder if you notice that that's the main name given to him in this chapter. Over and over again, he is the Son of the Father. So what does that really mean? It's a phrase we're probably familiar with it. We're quite used to calling Jesus the Son of God. But these verses help us appreciate it a little bit more, hopefully. So, God wants us to know himself. That's why he speaks to us. That's why he's created the world, so that we can look at it and get to know him through it. It's also one of the reasons why he sent prophets, so that they could tell people about God and turn toward him. It's why we have the Bible, so we can look at it, read it, and through it get to know what God is like. And even though those are all great ways of getting to know God, the best way, the final way in which he has spoken to us so we can know him, is through Jesus, his Son. You see, when we look at Jesus, we are getting to know God. That's why Jesus is able to say, anyone who's seen me has seen the Father. So we know that we are looking at the Son and we're getting to know him, and then also getting to know God the Father as we do that. And it says a couple of interesting things about Jesus as the Son here. It describes him, if you have a look in verse 3, as the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. So, what does that mean? Well, I think firstly, the radiance of the glory of God, he wants us to picture the sun. Have you got it in your head? That's the sun in the sky with a U. Picture that. What do you see? We see the sun itself, the source where all the light and heat comes from. And then we also see that coming from the sun are the rays. And I think we're seeing something here that's similar to Jesus the Son and God the Father. Now, of course, this isn't a perfect picture and doesn't give a full explanation of what it means for Jesus to be the Son of God the Father. But it is helpful. And there's a few things that are true about the sun in the sky that are also true about the relationship between the Father and the Son. So what do they have in common? What's similar? Well, one thing is that the source and the rays are always together. This is saying that Jesus is the radiance of God's glory. They're always together. Wherever you have the source, you know there's going to be rays as well. And wherever you see the rays, the radiance, you know they're coming straight from the source. And so we're seeing that Jesus the Son and God the Father are one. Always together. What else is similar? Well, we could look at the sun and again see the sun itself and the radiance coming from it. And we could say they're kind of one thing, but they're also kind of two things there as well. And again, that's true about God the Father and Jesus the Son. From what we know about them, we know, yes, they're one and together, but in a way they're separate as well. So again, not a perfect picture, and it doesn't give us a full understanding, but it's helpful, and it helps us know what it means for Jesus to be the Son. And then the other thing it says about him here is that he is the exact imprint of his nature. So I think this time it wants us to picture like a stamp. Imagine I had some ink here and I put my finger into the ink and then put it on a piece of paper. We know, don't we, that the marks on that piece of paper will, in a way, be exactly the same as what's on my finger. They're identical, they match each other, they are the same. And so I think here we're being told Jesus the Son is the same as God the Father. And so with these pictures, we're seeing Jesus is always with God, he is God, he's from God, and he acts like God. These are all things that it means for him to be his Son. And then what we have is a few verses that are quotes from the Old Testament, kind of from verse 5 through to the end of the chapter. And some of these explain more about what it means for Jesus to be the Son and help us understand it. So firstly, it says in verse 5 that God the Father speaks to the Son and says, "You are my Son, today I have begotten you." Or again, "I will be to him a father, and he will be to me a son." So, what do we see here? Well, father-son relationships. they're not always great, are they? And on earth, they're never perfect. However, this one, the relationship between God the Father and God the Son, is absolutely perfect. It's everything a father-son relationship should be. So what do we have? We have a father who is proud of his son, who loves his son, is so pleased with him and wants to show him off to everyone. He wants everyone to see how great his son is. This is why he speaks to us through his son. It's why he sent us Jesus, his son, so we can look at Jesus and go, wow, he is amazing. We also have a son who always obeys and trusts and loves and acts like his father. Parents, just think of all those battles that you've had with your lovely children. All the tantrums that they had. All the times where they just didn't understand why you were directing them in a certain way. All the times they just argued back or didn't act in ways that you wanted them to. No one's perfect. But then we have Jesus, a child who always obeys his father, always acts his father, always acts like his father, loves him, always trusts him at all times. This is what father-son relationships should be like. Whenever Jesus is baptized on earth, the Father speaks to him, doesn't he, and says, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." And these verses remind us of that and remind us of how great Jesus is as a son. And you might be wondering, because of the way things are written here in these verses, does this mean that there was a time when Jesus wasn't the son and then became the son? Because it says, doesn't it? "You are my son, today I have begotten you," or "I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son." Is it just talking about something in the future? I don't think that's what's happening, because we know, don't we, from the earlier verses, that Jesus the Son has always been with God his Father. He is eternal and has always existed as the Son. Instead, I think what this is saying is that Jesus has proven himself to be the Son. He has proven himself so that we can see him as the Son and we can know, yes, he definitely is the Son of God. I think it's also saying that Jesus has fulfilled his role as the Son in a more complete way. Now, this doesn't mean that he wasn't the Son in the first place, but that he's showing what it means to be a son and acting like the Son more and more. How can we make sense of this? Well, think about a baby. A baby that's, let's say, a year old now. You would say that baby belongs to those parents. That is the child of those parents. That's true here and now, no question. But you would also say that maybe in 5 or 10 years' time, that child will start to do things that show you they really are the child of those parents. They start to look like them a little bit more. They start to act like them. And the parents themselves says, "Wow, they really are, that really is our child." And other people will look on and say, "Wow, that really is the son of him and the son of her." And I think with Jesus and his life on earth, that's what he's doing. He is fulfilling his role as son and proving himself to be the perfect Son of God the Father. So, Jesus always has been and always will be the perfect Son of God. And he is proven to be so. We also see that he's called the Heir in verse 2. He was appointed heir. And the Firstborn in verse 6. These are names given to sons, aren't they? The fact that it says he was appointed the heir by the Father, that shows us that it's a legitimate appointment, doesn't it? It's not just Jesus saying, I've decided I want to be the heir, I want to take possession and inherit. Instead, we have a father saying, yes, you are my son and I want you to be my heir. And the heir is someone who reigns and inherits and takes over either alongside or after their parent. And Jesus is called the Firstborn. What does that mean? Well, I think whenever the first people who read this read the word firstborn, I don't think they thought about someone being born. Instead, they heard that as a title. It was a title that was to do with status and importance. It meant being the oldest son, the most senior, having the most authority, all those things. And these are things that are true of Jesus. Maybe a modern similar example might be a director and a manager in a business. We have the director who is over the whole business, and then the manager who kind of works alongside and under him, and the manager has the highest status. He is the most senior, the most respected, has the most control. This is like Jesus and God the Father in a way. And so whether this is stuff that you already knew, or you're hearing it for the first time now, or getting to know it a bit better, hopefully thinking about Jesus as the Son helps us see him, helps us know him a little bit better. And we know that doing that is going to help us follow him. So, Jesus is the Son, the heir, the firstborn. Secondly, let's think about Jesus as the ruler. You see, in verses 8 and 9, we're told that Jesus has a throne. It says, this is God the Father speaking to the Son. Of the Son, he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. And then in verse 13, he's sitting at the right hand. And so we know, with Jesus being described as God himself here, there is something special and unique about Jesus. Jesus is on the throne and he rules. And maybe a helpful way to think about how Jesus rules is to think about how people in the Old Testament understood kings, or at least how they were supposed to understand kings. You see, they didn't just look at kings and stop there. Instead, they should have known that kings were placed in their position by God himself. So kings had the highest authority over them, but also a king had been put there and was approved of being there by God. And this is true of Jesus in a more full way than it was ever true of any other king. This is why it's able to say, in one place, he is at the right hand of the majesty. That's what it says in verse 3. But then in some of the other verses, like in 8, that he has his own throne. Because both are true. He is the king, but also he is the right hand of God, his Father. And there's a number of things in here that help us see why Jesus is such a good and suitable and perfect ruler. You see, he is the creator of everything. Through him, the whole world was created. It says that early on, doesn't it? In verse 2. And it says that he laid the foundation of the earth in verse 10. Whenever we think about those famous words in Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Do we remember? Jesus was there. It was through him that the whole world was made. So yes, we think about Jesus as man. I guess most of the times that we read about Jesus, we see him as man and maybe picture him that way. But let's not forget that he is also God, eternal God who created everything. In fact, that helps explain some of the things he was able to do as a man. Like when he was on a boat and there was a storm. Makes sense, doesn't it, that he was able to calm the waves and the wind because he was the one who had made them in the first place. We're also told that as well as making all things, Jesus upholds all things. No matter what you think of, whether it's the sun in the sky, or the trees that you see outside, or look around in the room that you're in right now, what do you see? Well, we know that everything is where it is, and everything is being kept where it is, because Jesus has put it there, and Jesus is keeping it there. That's what it means for him to uphold everything, from the big things to the little things. And this is true about us as well, isn't it? Our whole lives. Think about your lungs that just keep on breathing, or your heart that keeps beating. They keep going because Jesus keeps them going. It's important to remember this, isn't it? And it helps us appreciate him for who he is. We know Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. In verse 12, it says, he is the same, and his years will never end. And he's compared to the earth. If we were to think of the most stable, most reliable thing that we can think of, we'd probably think of the earth itself, wouldn't we? It seems like it's always been there. It never seems to change. It seems reliable. But these verses are saying that compared to Jesus, it's nothing. It's like a baby. Whereas Jesus has always existed and always will exist. Even the earth won't last compared to him. He is by far the most steady, most reliable, most unchanging thing or person that we could ever think of. And these are things that make him a great ruler, aren't they? He created everything, so he owns it. Makes sense for him to rule what he owns. And he keeps it going. He upholds it. And we also see that Jesus is a great and suitable and perfect ruler because of things he has done and because of his character. So verse 3, which is the first time it mentions him being by the right hand of the majesty on high. So the first time we're sort of thinking about him reigning, it says that he did that after making purification for sins. This is talking about how Jesus died on the cross for people like you and me, so that we could be forgiven for our sin, so that we could be made pure if we believe in him. This is one thing that makes him such a perfect ruler and the right ruler over us. We also see that he is perfect. In verses 8 and 9, it says his scepter, that's like his staff that he has beside him on his throne. It's like it's one of uprightness. And he loves righteousness. And he hates wickedness. Isn't this exactly the kind of ruler, the kind of king that we need? Of course it is. And thankfully, it's exactly the kind of ruler that we have in Jesus. One who is perfect and good all the time. So also we see that he's a great ruler because he is our Saviour and because he himself is good. So we've thought about Jesus as the Son, and we've thought about Jesus as the ruler. And all this shows us, doesn't it, that Jesus is worthy of being worshipped. Jesus is worshipped. Now you may have noticed that all the way through these verses, Jesus is being compared with angels. Well, why is that? It might be because the people who first read this were a little bit obsessed with angels, a bit fascinated with them. It's possible that some of them even thought Jesus was just a great angel. I'm not too sure. But what I do know is going on is he's being compared to angels because angels are great. Angels are impressive. And by comparing Jesus to them, we're seeing how much greater he himself is. This is how comparison works, isn't it? If I was to tell you, I know someone who's stronger than a baby, you would be like, who cares? That's not interesting, that's not important. But if I was to tell you, I know someone who's stronger than a gorilla, you would think, amazing, wow, I'm interested. I want to know more. I want to see this person. I want to see, is it really true? And so by comparing Jesus to angels, who are great, mysterious, powerful, impressive, and seeing that he's better than even them, then he becomes even more amazing to us. You see, angels are, it says in verse 7, of the angels he says, he makes them winds and ministers or servants, a flame of fire. So this is saying angels have their place, but they are created and they are servants. Whereas Jesus, as we know, is the one who creates. And he as the king and the one in control is the one who is served. And so we know that angels have their place, and that place is under Jesus. And we're told they will worship him. Let all God's angels worship Jesus. This is Christianity. This is what it means to follow Jesus, to worship him. God reveals himself, as we saw, so that we will worship him. That's why he spoke to us. That's why he's created the world. That's why we've got our Bibles, so we can worship God. And God never wants us to worship the wrong person or the wrong thing. He hates that. That's why he says, never make an idol in my image, because you'll end up worshipping it instead of me. And it's why he says, I will never give my glory to anyone else. God does not want us to worship or glorify the wrong person. And yet here he is saying, here is Jesus, sending us his son, who is the exact imprint or the perfect image of him, and who is the radiance of his glory. You see, God has sent us Jesus because he wants us to worship Jesus. Because by worshipping Jesus, we are worshipping God. So the question for us is, are we worshipping Jesus or someone or something else? Are we most impressed by Jesus or by something else? Think about who Jesus' rivals are in your life. Could be people, could be leaders who seem to have all the answers, whether that's Christian leaders or non-Christian leaders. Could be famous people who really impress you for one reason or another. Could just be things that you think are great. What we can do is compare them to Jesus. Compare them to Jesus and we will see that they lose every time. That's what's been happening with the angels, isn't it? And that's what we can do with anything else. I wonder if you've ever played the game Top Trumps. The way it works is there's cards, each one is a character, usually from a book or a film or something. And each of them is rated in different categories. And the way it works is different players will have a card each. and they will compare the categories to see who wins. I guess that's a little bit like what's happening here, as Jesus is compared with angels. You see, he gets 10 out of 10 in every category. Angels, yep, they're great, high scores, but compared to Jesus, they will lose every single time. Jesus is the greatest. And we know that's true no matter what we take to compare with Jesus. So, angels are great, they are servants, they have their place, but they don't compare to Jesus. Angels worship Jesus, and we can worship Jesus. And we know that anyone who doesn't, anyone who's his enemy, will end up being under his feet. Under his feet. That's what it says in verse 13. And so we've seen that Jesus is worthy of worship. And then the chapter finishes with verse 14, where it reminds us that angels are ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation. So again, we're being reminded of the role of angels, but those who will inherit salvation, who's that? That is people like you and me who worship Jesus. Inherit salvation. You see, Jesus, we're told in the next chapter, is not ashamed to call us his brothers and sisters. And we have seen, haven't we, how he is the Son and what that means. And we've seen how he is the heir and the ruler. And so if we understand what those things mean for Jesus, then hopefully realizing that we're his younger brothers and sisters becomes incredible. All these things. Now, there are some things that are only ever true of Jesus as the Son. It's only him who is the creator of the world. It's only him who's eternal. We could never be eternal. It's only him who is the firstborn. He is one with God the Father in a way that we never will be. But there are also some things that are true about Jesus the Son that can be true about us. You see, we can be children of God. We can have a relationship with him where he is our Father. We know that we are actually, although sinful and need to be purified, we can be made like Jesus. In fact, the Bible tells us that we can be made perfect like Jesus. Can you believe that? If we follow him. We are told as well that we are heirs alongside him, and we will reign underneath him. And when we've seen all the amazing things that it means for him to be the great ruler, the great king, to be the heir and to be ruling underneath him becomes great, doesn't it? So, what does it take to follow Jesus for a lifetime? Hopefully we've seen that the first thing to do is to look at him, get to know him better, worship him. And so let's try and think about him as the Son, and as the ruler, and as the one to be worshipped. How can you think about him more in those ways today and for the rest of this week? Because if you do, and you keep doing that, and you fix your eyes on him, then you will keep following him. Amen.